Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and with the Australian trade deal agreement, the first real free trade agreement that the government have finalised, MPs and businesses alike are not impressed. So much so that they are demanding more of a say in future trade deal negotiations. Naturally, the government are not really all that keen on this because these trade deals are not for business or for MPs, but for a legacy that is not in the long-term interests of either. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So taking business first of all. Obviously, the British farming industry are not at all pleased with the post-Brexit Australian trade deal. Free trade with Europe, fine. They receive subsidies, we're on a level playing field with other farmers around the continent. But free trade with Australia, curtains for them. Not even like they can just abandon the British market and focus on Europe, because although we've increased freedom of trade with our Australian cousins, we've built a wall the likes of which Trump would be proud with our European neighbours. But there are business sectors who can look at this trade deal with Australia and say, yeah, on a purely UK-Australia level, it's better than what we have now. We're not gonna diss it, but they're not excited about it. You know, the government are going, oh, we've got this trade deal with Australia, and British businesses have basically gone, right, yeah, I mean, it's quite a long way away. It's quite a long way away. We're going to struggle to trade an awful lot more with them. And the reason that they're not excited is because it doesn't compensate for the extra barriers that the government are needlessly placing on trade with Europe. At the end of the day, as far as the business sector is concerned, what is the net impact of Brexit? And at the moment, it is hideously negative. It's like stealing £20 off someone and then giving them £1 back. It's like, well, thanks for the pound, but I want my £20 back, please. The message from the business community is that, yes, this gives us better access to an international market, but we're losing access to a much bigger and more important market. William Bain, head of trade policy at the British Chambers of Commerce, said that ultimately it is businesses, not governments, that trade. He thinks that the business community need to be consulted on trade negotiations. And who's going to argue with that? That's what's happening everywhere else in the world. When the United States arranged trade deals, their business community's in on it. When Australia were arranging this trade deal, their business community was in on it. You know, it's a little bit like a new college that opened up near me a few years ago, I remember. So I went to an open day there, had a look around one of the labs. It was an absolute nightmare. It was brand new. And I just said, no experienced science teacher was consulted on the layout of this lab. Absolute nightmare. I would have hated to have tried to teach in it. Now, I've been quite fortunate in my career to have had 2 labs refurbished while I was resident in them, in 2 different places. And I involved myself heavily in the entire design process. Now, I didn't get exactly what I wanted on either occasion, but I steered the architects of disastrous decisions both times. The end users of a system have to be involved in the project from start to finish. Absolutely have to be. It's a little bit like the ramshackle systems we have for dealing with Brexit customs now. The logistics industry, the people who actually have to use it, were not consulted at all whilst it was being designed. End result, it's a mess. Businesses are not having involvement in our trade deals. End result, it's not actually helping them to trade. Chris Southworth of the International Chamber of Commerce tried to strike a bit of a conciliatory note with the government and say, well, you can quite understand why the EU-UK deal prioritised speed over quality, although even saying that is basically saying it's not a quality agreement. But he said that this needed to change now. This cannot be the pattern for other trade deals. The thing is, you have to ask yourself, why are the government negotiating and agreeing these trade deals? Because that might sound like a stupid question. In most situations, it would be. Leaving the customs union single market has meant losing hundreds of agreements, including trade agreements, all over the world. Of course, we need to replace them, so we need to negotiate and agree trade deals. But what stops it being a stupid question and makes it, in my opinion, an pertinent one, is that it is not obvious what the government's objectives are. Because their objectives are not to boost trade for British businesses. If it were, they would be involving them. It's not to improve working conditions for British workers. If it were, they would be involving unions. It is not for enhancing our reputation abroad, so-called soft power. If it were, Johnson wouldn't be picking fights with world leaders and would not have cut our international aid budget. Now, different governments, of course, prioritise things differently. Traditionally, Conservative governments of any time, even more moderate ones, don't ultimately care about workers, so don't tend to involve unions any more than they have to. But they do regard their international standing and have in the past battered for businesses. Johnson's government doesn't prioritise any of these things. Doesn't even pay lip service to them, in fact. Come up with any reason why the government would sensibly even be bothering with these trade deals that puts the interests of the country anywhere near the top of priority, and you can easily highlight how his actions are mutually exclusive with this. Rattling off trade deals this quickly, it's not getting us anything. The Australian Prime Minister recently said that the deal basically gives nothing for the UK. He says it's rubbish for the UK, but that's not his problem. It's great for Australia. And this will be the pattern and a message to the world that we are in the business of agreeing deals that heavily favour the other side. We don't want anything for them other than the photo opportunities, it seems. But it can't just be about the photo opportunities. So then you think about the fact that our trading relationship with the EU is being hampered badly. Because at the end of the day, this Australian trade deal hasn't been getting great press coverage either. So there has to be another reason for it. Johnson talks about wanting free trade with countries 2 oceans away at the other side of the world, but has a completely different attitude to countries on our doorstep. So if free trade is brilliant with Australia, then why isn't free trade with Europe brilliant? He's not interested in free trade. It's a sham. Or he wouldn't have pulled us out of the biggest free trade market in the world, and one that is right next to us. So you then inevitably think that these deals might be more about hampering a future government. Because being clear, this Brexit government cannot last forever. In fact, in a generation's time, it will have fallen. I don't just mean Boris Johnson, he'll have gone long before then. The whole premise of it. Governments that act against the interests of their own country as strongly as this rarely last. Where they do, like North Korea you may point to, well, that's down to having an incredible level of state suppression supported by a powerful neighbour who has their own reasons to encourage it. European history tends to be of populist leaders rising and then falling. Their legacies don't last. There's a public backlash against them, in fact. And often it doesn't end well for them personally either. So at some point, hopefully in a few years, with less pain experienced by other countries that have gone through this, we will wake up to these charlatans. We will insist on a government that wants to reverse the damage. But how to do it? Yes, there are many of us that would just want to rejoin the EU again, go for full reversal as quickly as possible. But being realistic, the bulk of the country is not in that place. It regrets leaving, but polling shows not in favour of rejoining, largely because of the very deep wounds still in the country. There are people that are trying to potentially repair relationships with friends and family and so on. They see that debate as reopening those wounds. And of course, we can't promise the same terms as before. So we need to take steps. Those steps mean closer alignment with the EU, bit by bit, until we get to the final bit where it's just obvious rejoining is in our best interests. But deals like this could make that impossible. An Australian trade deal means accepting Australian products that would not be legal in the EU single market. That would make it tricky to align with the EU without reneging on our trade deal with Australia and any other countries that have signed similar deals with us by then, especially, of course, the United States in mind. It could be argued that these trade deals are not about trade at all, and so of course businesses have no chance in being involved in them. They are political deals designed to make permanent the schism between UK and Europe. And the thing about government is that it's very difficult to implement something for the long term. Lots of governments talk about introducing this thing that'll stand the test of time. Doesn't happen, because the most destructive consequence of many in Labour's attitude is it's better to be out of power for decades at a time if needs be, just to get the right sort of leader into power at some point. They just think at some point the public will just randomly vote for Labour, and we need to have the right leader in place when they do it so they can introduce all of these things. The problem is that they can achieve nothing of lasting value, because whatever a Labour government can, if they can reverse Conservative policies, then when they lose power, the incoming Conservative government can, of course, reverse their policies. It's really that simple. You have to be in power for a long time to actually implement anything of lasting value, unless, and the only example I can think of is the NHS, the instant value to the population is obvious. And even then, past and present governments have chipped away at it, undermined it, undercover, so as not to make it too obvious they're doing so. So even then, it's not safe. But international agreements are perhaps different. A new UK government doesn't have the right to unilaterally change those, or you trash your international reputation. And this is speculation, of course, but these trade agreements could well make it more difficult for a more patriotic government to steer us back towards global credibility. And because that is the impact of these trade deals, you have to think there's a good chance that it's also the reasoning behind them. Because it's not just businesses that want a say in negotiations. A cross-party group of MPs has said the same thing. Now, of course, unlike the business groups, MPs collectively could actually demand this. Indeed, it should be normal procedure to be involved, but they voted themselves out of their responsibilities last year. It seems unlikely that a majority would vote to reverse that now. So all the minority of concerned MPs can do is appeal to the government that more involvement would help heal the wounds caused by Brexit. But I don't see this as persuasive. Johnson thrives on Brexit divisions. He doesn't want them healing. You almost feel he's disappointed that Labour aren't giving him a hard time over it. Divide and rule is all he knows. But those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, don't forget to click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, please also click the Patreon link for details. And until next time, I'll see you later.